My Classic Soul, the podcast dedicated to the best soul and R&B music throughout the decades. In our latest episode, soulmusic.com founder David Nathan is joined by longtime soulmusic.com colleague and music industry veteran Michael Lewis. Michael has worked with a number of major record labels throughout his career, including The Face, Motown and Sony Music. Today, they talk about the classic 1973 album Extensions of a Man by the legendary Donny Hathaway. David and Michael share about the diversity of material on the LP and how Donny expressed his artistry as a musician, composer and vocalist through tracks like the timeless and ever-relevant classic Someday We'll All Be Free and the much-loved instrumental Valdez In The Country, and Donny's unforgettable cover of I Love You More Than You'll Ever Know. Without further ado, let's join David and Michael to talk about Donny Hathaway.
Well, it's a pleasure to welcome you to my Classic Soul podcast today, Michael, as our guest to talk about the iconic, legendary Donny Hathaway. And it's significant that we are recording this for future airing on what would have been his 75th birthday, October 1st. You know, I was looking at different Donny Hathaway albums we could have talked about, and I know you were too. And we both settled on Extensions of a Man, and from 1973. And so, just to set this up, when was the first time you heard Donny Hathaway?
I'm sure I heard his music before this, but I think Someday We'll All Be Free. It's probably the first time that I really, latched on to his music and his genius, the power in his voice and his message.
Yeah, it's interesting when I go back and look at the history of Donny Hathaway's association with Atlantic and working with, of course, with Roberta Flack, who he knew from his days at Howard University. What I remember specifically, because at the time that his first album came out, Everything Is Everything, I was working in London and working with Blues and Soul, the company that owned Blues and Soul, Contempo, which was started by John Addy. And John had created a really good relationship with Jerry Wexler at Atlantic. And so when, I think by the time maybe it wasn't Everything Is Everything, but certainly by the time Extensions of a Man had come out or was coming out, John was very aware that how important Donny was as an artist for Atlantic. And I remember conversations I had with him, with John Abbey specifically, who was, of course, the editor of Blues and Soul, about, that they really were challenged to how to present Donny in terms of as a commercially viable artist, because when I say they, I'm referring to Atlantic, I'm referring to Jerry Wexler, I'm referring to Arif Mardin, was how to present him in a way that still allowed for his artistic expression, because he wasn't like a singles hit artist. He did have a few hits. I mean, even if you listen to the first single, The Ghetto, that's not like anything else, from that time. I mean, there are other records that follow, but 1969, The Ghetto, really quite revolutionary in many ways. And just his whole approach to music, didn't make him an easy fit in terms of making hit records. And back then, thankfully, Atlantic, was a label that would allow artists to cultivate a following, cultivate an audience. Roberta Flack, of course, is probably a great example of that with First Take, and then continuing to have her record, Chapter 2. And the point being, contemporaneous to that is Donny Hathaway, and allowing him the freedom to express himself, no matter what even if it didn't fit the confines of a hit single. And so my memory of this album is specifically that it was another you could say, exercise in artistic expression, rather than that, let's find out how we can have a hit. Now, it's not that they didn't want to have a hit, and not that they didn't want him to reach a larger audience, but it was definitely giving him the freedom to express himself.
Right. Starting with the first track, I Love the Lord, He Heard My Cry, which is an orchestral piece that he wrote and arranged. I can't think of anybody else who had something like that. No R&B artist had that kind of a thing on their that album. So yeah, that was it was revolutionary that they allowed him that space and that opening to, and
that the freedom to do that. Well, it's interesting. I just want to riff off of what you just said. I did an interview with him. I have the distinction of being the only British journalist who ever did an interview with Donny Hathaway in London. And he was in London on holiday or vacation, and he consented to doing a brief interview at his hotel with me, and really as a function of the relationship between Jerry Wexler at Atlantic and John Abbey, who I think Jerry Wexler is the one who told John that Donny was in London and that he would be open to doing a short interview. And so off I went. And one of the things we were talking about Extensions of a Man. This interview was in 1973. And I have a quote from him about, I love the Lord, He heard my cry. What he said at the time, he said that was of such diverse influences as Ray Charles, Curtis Mayfield, and the classical composer Rachmaninoff. And I added to that, and some Donny Hathaway thrown in. So as an example of how to start an album, I mean, that's kind of you got to really be believing in the artist to be able to do something like that. I mean, really. And so let's continue.
I think they had to recognize from the work that he had done with all the recordings and artists that he had worked with prior to that, even before he was signed as an artist. I mean, Curtis Mayfield, he played on Aretha's records, right?
Yep. A couple of them. Yeah. To be young, Gifted and Black, definitely, for sure. He's on that one. Yep, 1972. Yes.
So, I think they just, and it's great at that time that record companies would do that. They would see what an artist's potential was and allow them to exercise it.
Absolutely. And of course, it's true to say that, as a result of his duet album with Roberta Flack and Donny Hathaway, which was massive. I mean, really, really put him, I guess you could say, front and center of her audience, which was a growing audience. Whereas the Love and that album also is just an incredible. Well, we could definitely at some point do a whole podcast conversation about that album. But I think that in some ways set up the release of Extensions of a Man. Although there was a live album in between, Donny Hathaway Live, or was it called In Performance? In Performance, yes. Yeah. But let's continue talking about Extensions of a Man. So yes, you talked about the first track. So let's talk about some of the other key cuts on there. Vividly recall hearing I Love You More Than You'll Ever Know. And how I remember hearing it is as an Atco single, not on the album, before the album came out. And I'm trying to remember exactly where I was, but I just remember playing it. I was still living in London, and it just I can't even find the right word. I mean, it was sung with such like an ache, like an aching, kind of like from whatever the definition of soul in a song. Like if I could, there are probably like 10, 20 recordings by anyone of the whole soul music spectrum, where the essence of what we call soul is shows up. And I mean, I can still hear it in my head. I mean, I often wonder how someone sings from that place. I mean, because that's a place of just raw emotion, and as if what he was singing, even though he didn't write the song. The song, of course, was originally done by Blood, Sweat, and Tears. Whatever he found in the lyric,
it's a surrender.
It's personal. It's like you could tell. I mean, I'm just thinking of the lyric lines. I love you more than you'll ever know.
The depth of feeling that comes through.
Yes.
He really reaches down into the core, and brings it forward for the world to hear it.
Do you recall hearing the song? Do you recall where you were or when you first heard it? Was it many years later?
Probably around the time that it came out. I'm sure it was played on the radio, and where I was and around my house, definitely. But yeah, it was definitely an outstanding performance. You don't run across those kind of performances very often.
Yes.
And it's been covered so many times, but Donny's version is the only one that really resonates to the point where I don't even really want to hear anybody else sing it.
Yeah.
Because his version is so iconic. It's so complete,
Did you ever hear the Blood, Sweat, and Tears version?
I didn't. I
Me
don't.
neither. I mean, I don't even know what that sounds like.
This was before David Clayton Thomas was in the group, and I pretty much know them from that point forward. I think this was an earlier album, and it's funny. I was listening to that today, the Laura Nyro song, "When I Die."
Yes.
Yeah, but this was before that album, and I wasn't very familiar with it. But yeah, Donny just he put the stamp on that song.
Yes. And, while we are going to talk about a couple of the other songs, we should definitely focus on, for me, which is, I think, the timeless classic, probably of all Donny Hathaway's recordings. Unfortunately, he didn't make as many as some of his contemporaries, because, of course, he passed away in 1979, so he didn't have a long recording career. But, Someday We'll All Be Free. I mean, I'm shaking my head because, I could hear Hang On to the World
as it spins
around. Yeah. Just don't let the spin get you down. I mean,
I put it on recently. Actually, as we talked about we were going to do this conversation. Of course, I pulled it out, but started playing, and man, that song just gets right to you. Especially right now with everything that's going on. You need that. You need that inspiration to bring you back. Yeah. To center,
Absolutely. And it's a brilliant recording. I mean, I think it really, there aren't that many recordings. I think if we take like a span of time that really we can honestly call timeless. Mm-hmm. And I think that of all of Donny Hathaway's recordings, for me, that song is it. Someday We'll All Be Free. I mean, wow. And other people have done it, subsequently. I mean, there's a wonderful version of it by Aretha Franklin, which is actually, a little plug, is on a box set of Aretha's recordings, which is coming out in November.
Yeah, they used it for the Malcolm X, Spike Lee's Malcolm movies, the closing credits.
Correct. Yeah. Yes. Someday We'll All Be Free. Yes.
And again, this album was produced by Arif Mardin, the great.
Yeah. So let's talk about that, because we've talked about Arif Mardin in another podcast about the work he did with Shaka Khan, and I think sometimes just in the course of how the music industry works and how people don't always really see necessarily the brilliance of arrangers. I mean, I know that producers are of course critical, but Arif Mardin as an arranger, mm-hmm. I mean, on those, not just on working with Shaka, but working with Roberta Flack, working with Aretha. I mean, just
Barbra Streisand.
I mean, just a brilliant. I mean, Margie Joseph. I mean, just a brilliant orchestrator. I mean, someone who could hear. I mean, who could hear how to present Donny Hathaway in a setting that would work, because I'm sure that was not easy. I mean, you have a classically trained musician who is, in the realm of ability to do different things. Donny Hathaway is like right up there. In fact, I'm reminded of one of the quotes from the interview that we did, which I'm going to see if I can find the actual thing he said. It's not a very long quote, but it says, asking about Extensions of a Man as an album, that it has a conglomeration of different styles and moods. And he says that was quite intentional. I wanted to show what I can do. So, trying to capture all the diverse aspects of I want to say like a musical genius.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
Let's pause there for a quick break. Then we'll return to David Nathan and Michael Lewis as they continue to discuss the influence of the legendary Donny Hathaway on a generation of singers and his classic 1973 album, Extensions of a Man.
Out now on Soul Music Records in association with Platinum Garage Recordings, Preston Glass presents Love and Compassion, Volume 3, the third volume of the successful Preston Glass Presents Love and Compassion digital album series, continuing the positive messages of the previous two volumes. It includes guest artists Larry Graham, Chubby Tavares, Debbie Sledge, Robin S., and The Temptations' Ron Tyson. Preston Glass Presents Love and Compassion, Volume 3 is out now on all digital platforms.
Wake up, all you teach, it's time to teach a new way. Maybe then they'll listen to what you have to say, 'cause they're the ones who's coming.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
To try to capture that within the course of a one album or any album, you have to be pretty knowledgeable about music. And I think that's the thing about Arif. Mardin really brought that. I mean, I don't know how many other producers could have worked with Donny Hathaway and really allowed him the freedom, but also, created some just amazing music. I mean, that other song I was going to mention in particular is Love, 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 which was written by a New York songwriter and recording artist, J.R. Bailey. And I'm going to quote again from my brief Donny Hathaway interview. And I asked, what did he think of it? And he said, his eyes lit up. He didn't say anything. His eyes lit up. So I guess that meant he liked it. So let's talk about something else, Michael. I'd like to get your take on the fact that this album also contains several instrumentals. You mentioned I Love the Lord, He Heard My Cry, but there's also Valdez in the Country.
Yeah. Which I think was George Benson recorded that later.
He did.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, well, Donny wrote that song. And that is another example of his expansiveness. That he could. I mean, that was straight up a jazz. Who's the guitarist on that? Cornell Dupree.
Cornell Dupree. Yeah.
Right. Cornell Dupree.
Yes.
And Donny was on electric piano.
Yeah.
McDonald percussion. Yeah. Man, this is just the song moves. It's really good.
Yes, and then of course, I'm trying to look at this. When I think about that album, honestly, it's kind of hard for me to get past "I Love You More Than You'll Ever Know" and "Someday We'll All Be Free." Not to dismiss the other tracks, but those to me are so they're like the centerpieces for me of that album. So are there any other particular tracks on there that you want to focus on?
Yeah, Flying Easy, man. That song is Flying Easy. It's just that's what it makes you feel like you're flying. He gives you that, brings that feeling to a record.
Yes.
It just sounds like open sky. He takes you along. I love that song.
Yes. Well, I think it's in the remaining time we have. Let's summarize not just this album, but I mean Donny Hathaway's impact. It's interesting, some artists never get to find out, sadly, during the course of their life, the impact that they have on music. And I think Donny Hathaway is one of those artists whose impact on male vocalists, not just male vocalists, but he's so often cited by other people as an influence, as, we didn't really say much about his vocal, how adept he was as a vocalist. I mean, if people think Stevie Wonder's hard to sing along with, try a few Donny Hathaway tracks. I mean, no, I probably try to sing "I Love You More Than You'll Ever Know," but it was challenging. But just his range, I mean, just the kind of, just made such an impact on so many people.
The range, the purity of his voice, so it's so pure, and the tone of it is, nobody has a tone like him. I guess the closest is Layla.
Yeah.
There are certain, when you listen to him and you hear certain things that he does, and I think back and I say, oh, that's where she got that from. Some of those, how she does those low kind of,
low tones.
It's like, oh yeah.
Let me just say something about that, because it's interesting you mentioned that, Michael. Because I had the opportunity to be Layla Hathaway's first media coach, and this was courtesy of my good friend Jeff Foreman, who had signed Layla to Virgin Records in 1990. And I remember meeting a very young Layla Hathaway, who was studying at the Berklee School of Music at the time. And she was nervous because she hadn't done anything in terms of press or publicity. And her concern was that people would just keep talking about her dad and his music because of her heritage, But what she said was that because, unfortunately, he passed away when she was still very young, she didn't actually get to hear him a lot while he was alive. So the influence is more like, it's almost like in her, I want to say almost like in her gene pool. Yes, of course she heard him. But it's just that there are characteristics in both of their voices, which there's no one else that sounds like the Hathaways, you could say.
Right.
Really. Yeah. So it's interesting, very interesting. And I have to say that, even though the interview I did with him was challenging, and I did note that in one of the rare occasions when I actually said in print, that he wasn't as communicative as I had hoped he would be. And then I was taking account he was on holiday. But what struck me was, that, the music he created on that album was just so demonstrative of his artistry, and the fact he was talking at that time also about an album, a piece of work he had begun recording called Life, which was a 4-part symphony concerto actually, that actually finally did come out many years later as part of a box set. On Donny Hathaway was, I think, in France, if I recall correctly.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. So, his music has lived on, and he's still considered a major influence. And, I just think that even though there are not a lot of Donny Hathaway recordings, what we do have is a testament to his greatness as a musician, as an artist, as a vocalist, and
really an influencer. He's
absolutely. To wrap up on talking about Mr. Hathaway, who are some of the artists of today, Michael, that you can hear the influence of Donny Hathaway through their own work?
I would say definitely Kenny Lattimore. and Frank McComb.
Oh, for sure. Yes. Kenny Lattimore, of course, did record "I Love You More Than You'll Ever Know," which is a direct tribute to Donny Hathaway. Anyone else?
Those are the two that come to mind immediately.
Yeah.
Really
Right. All right. Well, it's really great to be talking about Donny Hathaway on his, as I say, what would have been his 75th birthday. I know that in conversations with Roberta Flack, she still considers that, her collaborations with Donny Hathaway were amongst the best work she ever did, and certainly has no hesitation in considering him. He certainly used the word genius.
Mm-hmm.
And I think my only regret is never seeing Donny Hathaway live, even though we had 2 albums of his live recordings. I just wonder what that was like.
Yeah. We can only imagine. But those recordings are, I think, the in performance is definitely one of the best live albums I've ever heard.
Yeah.
It's just the top,
Yes. All right. Well, we've talked about Extensions of a Man, Donny Hathaway. Wonderful to be able to pay tribute to an iconic figure in the world of soul music and certainly in music itself. And I think it's fitting that we're doing it today. And then just also to say that, I want to say one more thing to kind of underscore what you're saying at the earlier part of this, which is about the fact that Atlantic Records, as a label, was willing to invest time, energy, and money into the development of artists like Roberta Flack, Donny Hathaway, and to some degree Aretha. Obviously after she started having hits, there's some of Aretha's albums from that time period also that demonstrate a willingness to give her the creative freedom to express herself. So I think one of the things I just want to kind of kudos to Atlantic and Jerry Wexler and Arif Mardin and Jerry Rent, and the other members of the staff at Atlantic who really were pioneers in allowing artists to be themselves.
Mm-hmm. We're fortunate for that.
Yes,
we really are.
All right. Well, Michael, as always, a pleasure speaking with you, and I'm sure we're having another podcast sometime soon about another of the extraordinary artists that are at the core and fabric of the genre we proudly call soul music.
Classic soul. Yes, sir.
That's right.
All right, David.
All right, then.
Thank you, man. Talk to you soon. All
yeah.
Right.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, David and Michael. Please don't forget to subscribe and leave us a review on your favourite podcast platform, and visit us for breaking news and daily updates about your favourite soul and R&B artists over at soulmusic.com. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time on My Classic Soul.